We'll get going in 5 minutes.
Yeah. What do you want to use part of the stage and not the do you want to sit down or stand?
We want to show you how they shot under the horses.
As long as you're safe, then yes.
Okay.
Just nobody gets hurt. Yeah. No acrobatics. No death-defying leaps. So about 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Good. Okay. Good. Good job. So when you're ready, you guys can just grab a seat unless you're So when you're ready, you still have time, but when you're ready, make sure you have an ambassador from each group to explain the sculpture to us and summarize briefly the passage that you read. So a brief summary of your passage, explanation of your sculpture. Two minutes. 2 minutes. No. You'll present from where you are in the room. Yes. Yeah. And we'll start with one and we'll go in order. Work. Can we turn this mic on? This one up here? Yes, yes, yes. One. Check. I'll check it. Check. Is it working? Yes? Okay. Good? Okay, when you're ready, grab a seat. Yeah, when you're ready, sit down. You've still got 45 seconds. Good? Good. Okay. All right, how'd it go? Okay? All right. So, of course, as we're doing this, ask yourself, what is different about exploring the textbook in the way that we have been doing it today? Well, it's not really textbook, but the book. Versus if I was to just lecture about it. There's a significant difference. Ask yourselves why we would do it this way. If it isn't making sense, stay tuned, okay? So right now, we're about to kind of walk through a museum, if you will, a living one, a current one. And we're going to look at some of these eras that Tamim Ansary says are part of the Islamic narrative of history, right? So he starts off ancient times, and we're going to hear something from Zoroastrianism. We go into the birth of Islam. We're going to see a sculpture of the Hijra, right? Then we talk about the caliphate. How do we lead? I mean, what does authority look like in Islam? Then we're going to see the sultanates. We're going to hear this idea, waqfs. Then we're going to move into this period with Genghis Khan, right? Significant in the history of Islam. And then we have a rebirth and the rise of the Ottoman Empire. So we'll see something about that. Then we'll talk about some getting closer to modern era, conquered. We'll hear about that. And we won't get into Ataturk and the rise of secular modernism. That's a really interesting chapter in the book. And of course, reactions to the rise of secular modernism, which kind of brings us current. So this is more or less the chapters in Ansary's book are all arranged in this way, okay? And it's chronological. And he's saying that these are the major points in the arc of history, in the same way that this is the arc of history for the West. Now, obviously, this doesn't talk about every single thing that happened in the West. It's a generalization, but not, it's a reasonable generalization. So similarly, this is not everything that happened in the history of Islam, but some highlights, some important, influential, and significant dates. But instead of me talking about them, we are going to see what you were able to put together. So who was my group one, my Zoroastrianism? Okay, so I'm going to pass this microphone to your ambassador. When you're ready, you'll freeze the sculpture, and then ambassador will just walk us through what we're seeing here. And the ambassador will also kind of summarize the passage and explain their sculpture, and then we'll get to all the different groups. Who's your ambassador?
All right, so our first thought was not to do anything because, as the reading says, the Persian Zoroastrians rejected religious statues, imagery, and icons, laying the basis for the hostility toward representation in religious art that reemerged forcefully in Islam. But we wanted to explain the concept, so we did decide to do something after all. So what we're enacting here is this sort of, as the passage describes, a tug of war in Zoroastrianism between two opposing forces, the forces of good and evil. So we have two divinities represented here. So over here we have Ahura Mazda, representing the principle of good, and fire is often, can you give me some fire? An iconic representation. And then over here, and please correct my, probably which will be a mispronunciation. Ahriman, the principle of evil. And so we have these dualities here, and it's opposing camps. The universe since the creation was put into opposing camps between darkness and light, good and evil. And by choosing good, people promote the forces of light and life. And by choosing evil, they give strength to the forces of darkness and death. So let's have this tug of war. And, all right, yeah, we didn't win a freeze.
What I like about that is this, in Zoroastrianism you have the forces of good and the forces of evil, thank you so much, that are in opposition to one another, right? It's a struggle about good versus evil. It's that essential, that kind of dualism. There's evil, there's a light side of the force and the dark side of the force, right? A lot of Jedi imagery comes out of, it's an old Zoroastrian idea, right? So beautifully done, beautifully done. Let's give them one more round of applause. Good job. Okay, group two. Let's see it for maybe 5 seconds or so, and then explain it, so we can kind of absorb it and then walk us through it. Okay, so this is it? Okay, so freeze. Okay. Tell us when you're ready. Okay, freeze it. Okay, so we started off in, what is your keyword?
The Hijra?
The Hijra. Okay, so we start off in Zoroastrianism, the oldest monotheism, older than Judaism, arguably. We saw that in Zoroastrianism. We're still in the same, we're still in the Middle East, obviously, and now we're moving into the Hijra, right? So if you don't know what that is, you're seeing a sculpture of it right now. Oh. So I'm seeing a gesture, looks like cutting scissors in the middle. I see someone walking. I see hands up. Oh, excellent. Okay, let's give him a round of applause. All right, what did we see? Tell us about what we saw.
Okay, so you saw Hijra, it was the emigration of Muslims from Mecca to Medina, and so the cutting of the tie the cutting motion was the cutting of like the ties with the old, with Mecca when you went to Medina, and at the very end, we saw the, gosh, what was it? Where is it? It was the, gosh, I can't find it now. But it was the birth of the Islamic community called, what was it? Oh, Ummah.
Yeah, good. So the Hijra is a really significant event. I loved, what were you doing when you were walking? Right, leaving Mecca, going to Medina, right? So the Hijra is when Islam becomes such a big political movement, it becomes a direct threat to the authorities, to the Qurayshi authorities that are in Mecca at the time. The Qurayshi authorities are trying to assassinate Muhammad, they're trying to get rid of Islam because it's becoming an economic threat, right? It's gotten big enough to threaten the powers of Mecca. So when the movement becomes so big that it becomes a political movement and you have to leave Mecca and go to Medina, this is the Hijra, right? And this is them leaving from Mecca to Medina because the group has gotten so big. So this is when year 1 in the Islamic calendar is 632. And this is when Islam is considered to be born, right? It's not born with the Prophet. The Prophet's birthday isn't even celebrated in a lot of places. Some places it is. It depends on where you go. But in other places, it's not. Born with the movement, not with the Prophet. Let's give him one more round of applause. Good job. All right, group 3.
So can I want to read this paragraph before you guys start.
Sure, yeah, however you want to do it.
I'll set it up and then read the paragraph.
You got it. It is your art show. It's your exhibit.
No.
And I want to make sure we get to everyone.
Okay.
So let's
So in theory,
brief.
WASP.
Waqfs. Yeah.
In theory, WASP could not be shut down by its founder. Once born, it owned itself and had a sovereign status. Think of it as a Muslim version of a non-profit corporation set up for charitable purposes. Under Muslim law, WASP could not be taxed. They collected money from donors and distributed it to the poor. Built and ran mosques, operated schools, hospitals, and orphanages. Generally provided the
Burgeoning, like the arising.
upper classes with the means for expressing their religious and charitable urges, and to feel good about themselves while flowing with in wealth. So here we have the government asking for taxes, holding the law,
Okay, I like it.
and this is the head of the corporation saying, no, it's ours.
Oh, I like it.
This is a wealthy person donating coin to the poor, and then a representative of the organization giving the scholarship to the needy.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I love that. Very well thought out. Brilliant,
ready?
brilliant. So the Waqfs obviously play a huge role. If you want to read more about that, read the book. They're really, really important. It's how upward mobility becomes possible. This is around the time that we have feudalism in Europe, when you have kings and peasants, right? And there wasn't much mobility. Waqfs made it so that anybody, if you could get hired at one of these institutions, all of a sudden you had a job and an income. So it was a way that provided social mobility in this time period in Islam. So that was a perfect sculpture. Please.
We are Sharia law. Sharia law is the jurisprudence of Islam. It's all the interpretations of the Quran, which is the holy book for Muslims, and the Hadith, which are the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. And so over time, these experts, jurists, which are right here, are interpreting the Quran and the Hadith through a body of law. And she is giving us this gesture because on her left is an early interpretation of the Quran that says women need to cover their hair out of modesty, which she is doing. But then over time, certain new fabrics, new cultures became Islamic, and they dress differently. But the jurist is saying, interpreting the Sharia, that a hood covers her hair, even if it's not from the same culture as that style, it still meets Islamic law.
Awesome. Awesome. Brilliant. I love that. I love that one. Thank you so much. That's a great one. So the development of Sharia laws is how do we take the teachings of the Quran and turn it into law, right? So it's a fascinating, one thing that you did that was really important there is we saw that there's multiple ways to interpret it. So Sharia law is not monolithic. You have various schools in Sharia law, each one emphasizing different similar things. And this chapter on the development of Sharia law is absolutely fascinating. Great sculpture. Thank you. Let's see group 5.
You guys have a few seconds to take it in. Now, the chapter or passage we received was on Genghis Khan, and I'm sure many of you heard that name. And Genghis Khan represents the Mongol hordes invading and attacking the Muslim empire, the Muslim armies, and it was, as the chapter mentions, it was a big setback. It was a catastrophe for the Muslim civilization during that time. And for first, our gentleman is representing riding on a horse and shooting a crossbow. This was the technological advances of the Mongols. They were very swift at horseback. They could ride incredibly fast and shoot while using the body of the horse as a shield, as armor. And then next we have the victim claiming for mercy. And unfortunately, the Mongols offer no mercy. Now, third, we have a Mongol chasing after the victim as they did not let people flee. It was, as the word says, a catastrophe for that time. And then our final victim is trying to flee for her life, and fortunately, she gets away.
Brilliant. I love it. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. All right, our group 6, where are you? And while we're doing that, that was a brilliant sculpture. The Mongolian hordes are happening around the same time as the First Crusade. The First Crusade is a big deal in Western history. It was a big deal in Islamic history, but Genghis Khan was even bigger and even more formative in the history of Islam. So beautiful sculpture.
All right, so we have the Ottoman Empire. It was a very organized legal system. It was a very fair system as well. So here we have the Wazir, which is the second most powerful figure after the Sultan. And here we have the...
Looking very regal, I see. I like it.
Here we have the lawyer, who is solving a conflict between a Jew and a Muslim. So basically, during that time, the Ottoman Empire was a fair legal system that not only dealt with Muslims, but it also dealt with other religions
Yeah.
too. So that's how fair it was.
Yeah. Take a look. This is beautiful. The Ottoman Empire is so complex. Give them a round of applause. This is beautiful. That is beautiful. The Ottoman Empire is one of the most complex political structures in history. It was so complex, and that really beautifully captured there was different levels of authority as well as conflict among different groups. Really well done with a complex one. And you were 6, so our last group, group 7.
So our sculpture is dynamic, and I'm part of it. You can see we're kind of a small group, and we have kind of a domino effect here. So I have to start and then tell you what you're seeing.
Ready?
Wait, that was it.
Okay.
This is our sculpture. Okay, yes, thank you.
All right, tell us.
So what you see here is a moment in Islamic history that's kind of a little bit of an identity crisis in the 18th century when not perhaps as fearsome and traumatic an event as the invasion of Genghis Khan, but a little bit similar because many Islamic countries were occupied not just by Muslims, but by many, many different foreigners. And there was a little bit of an identity crisis with Muslims feeling as if, well, are we Muslim anymore, and what does it mean to be Muslim? And there were basically three responses to this identity crisis. Here, in some cases, the response was to say, we really need to discover a kind of pure Islamic identity. And so many Muslims responded by kind of rediscovering their Islamic faith. Another response was to say, okay, there's something that we need to learn from the West. We're going to kind of clear out all the superstitions that have crept up into our practices. And so that was, he's turning his back on superstitions. A third response
Beautiful.
was to see Islam as indeed a pure and true religion without any kind of Western infiltration, but still open to Western scientific thinking. And so here we have kind of a combination of the two, preserving a pure Islamic identity while embracing certain features of Western science and secular thought. There you go.
Wow. Give them a round of applause. Beautifully done. Wow. I am impressed.
These were very complex ideas that you so beautifully put into that sculpture right there. Really well done. Okay, everyone give yourselves all a round of applause. Thank you. So we are about out of time, so I will leave you with a few thoughts. What do you think is different? What do we learn? Why do it